All right, welcome to Bet the Edge. I'm Jay Croucher here with Drew Dinsick. We're recording Monday afternoon. We're going to talk today, fun show, I think. We're going to talk about the Cardinals and the Cowboys going in opposite directions following Week 8. Talk about Coach of the Year and Dan Quinn ascending to Tier 1 status all by himself in that market. And then we'll spend a bit of time at the end talking about the presidential election and the betting market there, which I'm excited to get stuck into. But before we talk about the future of the free world, let's talk about the Arizona Cardinals, who are 4-4 and currently, I believe, on tie breaks, winning the NFC West. The Cardinals, who were, what did they close, 4.5-point dogs against the Dolphins, and it's kind of just meh, kind of slightly under 500 type of level team, and then they get this win, and now they're seriously in the mix to win the division. They're plus 400 on BetMGM to win the NFC West, which my number is actually a little bit of value, but where do you think the Cardinals stand in the hierarchy of that division at the moment? And do you think the plus 400 is any good?
Yeah, so that was a pretty wild result. And I was against the Cardinals this last week, so it stings to talk about this. But the facts are they played an amazing game. The Dolphins did not have the ability to close the door on them, despite the the 8 or 9 point lead late in that contest. But this was a huge swing in equity. And you're right, they are standing at the top of the NFC West currently, as they are the only team in the NFC West that is 2-0 in division. The wins against the Rams and Niners were actually, they were good wins. And, in general, I would say Kyler Murray is a little bit of a mercurial player. His numbers are not always the greatest, but when he plays well, he absolutely has the goods to kind of carry this team and this offense to being competitive. And if you have a quarterback who can perform the way that Murray can on any given day, then you're in games now in the NFL. And so I completely have to kind of change my perspective on how I view this team currently. I thought the loss of Will Hernandez was going to be hugely impactful to their offensive line. It has not been. I thought the defense kind of losing some key players in the second level and really not having much of a pass rush was going to be a liability. It hasn't really been. And so I think ultimately the fact that the Cardinals could just hang around long enough and have a shot at this division is a real possibility. I went from kind of thinking that the Seahawks were very live to win the West last week to now the Rams, or after Thursday night, the Rams are very live to win the West, and now kind of sitting here and agreeing with you that 4-1 is probably a fair price. And then maybe just more broadly, the Niners just they're more vulnerable than the market realizes as far as getting that division home. So, I think it absolutely is huge that they banked 2 wins in division and 4 wins overall as far as actually getting a playoff spot. And I thought that the NFC West was really only going to have a shot at 1 playoff spot. But wild card is definitely open for whoever doesn't finish on top here. So, the upgrade for the Cardinals from the preseason to now has been pretty meaningful for me. I thought this was going to be somewhat of a bad team that people were too excited about. But no, this offense is for real. And as long as Kyler Murray continues to play like he did on Sunday, then they're in it. So 4-1 is not crazy. And I think just in general, looking at how the market is treating them against Chicago is pretty fascinating, because Chicago was a darling last week. Now that was largely bets in expecting that Jaden Daniels wasn't going to play, and he does. But Chicago has been upgraded, I think, by most handicappers pretty aggressively as their offense has found their feet. And now ultimately this is going to be a pretty fun test for a Chicago offense that did nothing for 3 quarters against Washington and now has to take on an Arizona team that's plucky and challenging. So really excited to see how the market treats the Cardinals in this one. My fair makes this a pick 'em, so it's Bears or pass for me. And that is, again, after a meaningfully healthy upgrade to this Cardinals team as Kyler Murray continues to, kind of utilize his weapons more effectively and really just play well in the absence of outstanding talent around him. It's quite impressive.
Yeah, I think the Cardinals right now, as it relates to plus 400 to win the division, I think they're very much a context of the kind of non-team strength factors that impact that market, like tiebreakers and remaining strength of schedule, which favor Arizona handily at the moment. Like, look at their upcoming schedule. It's Chicago and the Jets, both at home, bye week. 2 games against Seattle, at Minnesota, now without Christian Darrisaw, like Patriots and Panthers, and then they close out with 2 of the tougher games at the Rams and home San Francisco. And so as far as it relates to them getting a playoff spot, like you couldn't put the San Francisco game in a better area than week 18. Now, if they're trying to win the division, that will be material. But as it relates to just getting a playoff spot in general, like there are worlds where the Niners have clinched the division by that point, and maybe the Cardinals need that game against Josh Dobbs to clinch the last wild card spot. So it all shakes out pretty nicely for them. It's such a boon to have home Patriots at Panthers back-to-back in week 15 and 16.
I got one quick question for you about the Cardinals before we turn the page.
Sure.
Do you think they're trade deadline buyers?
I mean, yes, yeah, they lead the division, and they have a legitimate, I guess, above average quarterback. Kyler's such a strange player. He looked like kind of not broken, but there were broken elements of his game in that Chargers Monday night game, and then he just looked awesome against the Dolphins. Like no caveats, he just looked phenomenal. And the fact that he was able to be so efficient without relying on his legs, and also I think the bigger thing there is that he showed the connection with Marvin Harrison Jr., and that had been the thing that had really been lacking the previous couple of weeks. Like if that is going to be a thing now of Marvin Harrison Jr. being, an elite top 12 receiver the rest of the way, which I think is totally within the realm of outcomes, then you add that to, having Trey McBride, having other kind of tertiary weapons that are useful, and the O-line isn't great, but Kyler has always been able to work around that to some extent, even if it doesn't put him in the best situation to succeed. And then the defense is never going to be great, but maybe has enough to get by. So, yeah, I don't like, what are they going to, like, they could probably use an edge rusher. They could really use anything on defense.
Yeah, edge for sure. That would have been what I would expected. They were out there kicking the tires on, and you see, Chiefs made a nice move today. I think getting Uche off the Patriots. As they kind of, I don't know what that rebuild is actually happening, but if there are teams that are pretty clearly out of it that have edge rush or pass rush or specialist, even pass rush specialist available, I would expect the Cardinals wouldn't be the worst thing if they made some calls, because they've tacked hard stocking up talent, or at least young talent, taking some swings on young talent on the offensive side of the ball. But this defense really could use some kind of pop. So yeah, I'm curious to see if they think they're ready to buy now, or if they think they're still a year away.
Indeed. Well, team that might be a couple of years away now, the Dallas Cowboys, coming off that loss to San Francisco, where it really felt like San Francisco was going to blow that game. And then Dak Prescott, I don't think he gained a yard on his final drive. Even though, to be fair, he did throw a perfect ball to Jalen Tolbert down the left sideline, and Tolbert just couldn't come down with it. But now they are 3-4. They are plus 900 to win the NFC East. So the division is all but gone. They have this massive game against the Falcons, which I think is probably going to decide their season. The Falcons are 2.5-point favorites. Micah Parsons, I guess he's probably going to come back. And if he's not going to come back, then I don't know why they didn't put him on IR. But do you think there's any way to bet the Cowboys now? Any interest plus 300 to make the playoffs, or minus 400 to miss the playoffs?
It's minus 400 to miss now. Wow.
Yeah.
My goodness gracious. I bet a little bit of that back when we were talking to Pizzola about the Cowboys, and then they went out and played their best game of the season. So I felt like an idiot, but I think that's back to life. The Cowboys right now I would rank as the 21st best team in the NFL. I think they have some serious clear issues on offense in terms of just being able to create any kind of balance and sustained attack, digging themselves a hole and then asking Dak to ball like he did to get them back in games is not a sustainable way to play football. And I think that makes them very fragile, as their defense right now is pretty clearly not top half of the NFL. When Micah Parsons comes back, I think their defense will be ranked kind of in like the high teens, like 12, 13-ish generally. And that may be good enough to get them some wins against the kind of the bottom dwellers that they get to play through the middle and end of their schedule. But they're going to be lucky to be a 500 team at this point, considering the way they've given themselves this, dug themselves a little bit of a hole. 3-4 through 7 games is not how I projected them whatsoever when we, kind of handicapped them in the preseason. I thought, certainly losses to the Ravens and the Niners and the Lions shouldn't be surprising, but the degree to which they were not really competitive at all in the Lions game, and outside of the small chance they had to come back against the Niners, not really competitive against the Niners, I think is pretty telling about sort of the state of this team. This is a tough spot for them at the Falcons, with the Falcons kind of continuing to improve offensively and not really having much of an answer for what could be a pretty compelling two-headed monster of running and passing. So I right now think the Cowboys are on, their season is pretty clearly on life support, and the Eagles are playing well enough. The Commanders are playing well enough. I think that the best they can hope for at this point is 9-8 and third place in division. And maybe if the rest of the NFC just kind of loses the plot, then maybe the 7th seed in the playoffs, but probably not. And I don't think that there's really much upside really in taking any of the prices, because even if they do find their way in, are they a good enough team to win 3 games on the road? Absolutely not, in my opinion. And I think that this is probably a longer and more painful rebuild than anyone realized as we looked at the roster in the offseason. So they're losing in the trenches on both sides of the ball. Their linebackers are very, very susceptible to all kinds of intermediate misdirection and attack. And unless Micah Parsons comes back and is the best player on earth, then this defense is going to continue to put their offense behind the 8 ball. And without a running game, without any ability to create balance on offense, then they're in deep trouble.
Indeed. I have the Cowboys minus 349 fair to miss the playoffs. So pretty much right in line with market, which is grim if you're a Cowboys fan. All right, Sunday Night Football heads to the Great Northern this week when Justin Jefferson and the Vikings host Anthony Richardson, and the Colts, NBC and Peacock, will lead you up to kickoff with coverage starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. All right, one man who was leading the Coach of the Year market was the coach of the Vikings, Kevin O'Connell. He's drifted out now to plus 500 off the back of 2 consecutive losses. Dan Quinn is the favorite at plus 250. I think Dan Quinn, and we'll talk about whether his price is still value, but I think there is a chance that Tyreek Stevenson tipping that ball into Noah Brown's hands might have flipped Dan Quinn from like 15% equity to 40% equity in the market. At least that's how I would pass it out. Jim Harbaugh is the third favorite at plus 600, which I don't really understand. Also, even to a lesser extent, I don't understand Sean Payton being 6-1. Dan Campbell and Andy Reid are 7-1. And then Mike Tomlin, Matt LaFleur round out the second tier. So I want to throw 2 questions at you, Drew. And I think this is, to me, this is the best way to frame this market now. So by my calculations, I make the Commanders plus 167 fair to win 12 plus games. And then I also make the Kansas City Chiefs to win 16 plus games at plus 421. So I think those are in a way, 2 kind of pillars of this market. And so overall, how do you feel about, and look, Dan Quinn winning 12 games is more likely than Andy Reid winning 16 games. But how would you feel about those 2 cases kind of stacking up against each other?
It's pretty impressive, and that's a lot of wins. And I kind of agree that that's like there's a pretty clear delineation of candidates after that. The way you framed it about Kevin O'Connell, Harbaugh, and Payton, I completely agree. I think all 3 of those continue to drift, and it's just a matter of when they lose, they'll fall. And I can tell you that 12 wins for the Washington Commanders, which seemed absolutely absurd in the preseason, I make right now just under 30% that they're going to get to 12 wins. They have a very, very soft schedule remaining. And I think in general, the market is going to continue to upgrade these guys as you have the big question kind of swirling last week was how hurt is Jaden Daniels, and will he be able to be available for the run here? And the defense being as such a strong component of their success, particularly in yesterday's game, I think gives you all the latitude in the world to give credit to Dan Quinn. We know he is extraordinarily well liked. And I think just in general, it's going to take, it's going to take 16 wins for Andy Reid probably to close the gap if the Commanders get to 12. And I think that's possible for the Chiefs right now. I have the Chiefs as 25% chance to get 16 or 17 wins, which is also seems insane. But their schedule is also very easy. So slightly higher chance for me for the Commanders to get to 12 than the Chiefs to get to 16 or 17. Now, if it's 17 for the Chiefs, then kind of it's game over.
Yeah, I think that. And in terms of the Chiefs getting to 17 wins, I make that about a 5% chance. So it's in play. 5% is a lot more than nothing, which is usually what these things feel like. I also do wonder, though, if there are some kind of additional ancillary factors that just kind of naturally push teams away from having a perfect season that are difficult to capture in a simulation. Like if you have to win every single week, there's usually probably 1 week where just kind of the variance of just all kind of everything kind of aligning against you, or, you know, it's like 4 different players being sick the same week. Like that kind of stuff adds up. It's very hard to, you know, just shoot the narrow gap of winning every single game, though their schedule isn't super hard. I think, I mean, in terms of like actual actions and what to bet or not, it probably doesn't matter so much because I think that both of those guys are value in the market at Quinn plus 250 and Andy Reid at 7-1. But it is interesting to stack up like would Reid at 16-1 beat Quinn at 12-5. I kind of think Quinn would win there just because, particularly now that the defense is competent, or at least has been competent for a little stretch, which was probably the one Achilles heel of Quinn's case, is that if Jane Daniels was going to win these blowouts 40-20, then Quinn, or 40-30, then Quinn, being a defensive head coach, wouldn't have as much narrative. I didn't hurt D'Amico Ryan so much last year, being a defensive coach and kind of being carried a little bit by CJ Stroud's heroics. But I think the fact that the defense has been solid, despite having nothing in terms of personnel, I do think helps Quinn. Momentum and sequencing of wins matters in these things a lot as well. One other name I wanted to throw at you. What do you think of Dan Campbell's prospects if the Lions go like 15-2 and get the 1 seed, and I make the Lions to win 15 plus games plus 721?
Yeah, we're on this exact same wavelength, because I was just going to say the other kind of 20%-ish chance of something wild happening is the Lions getting to 15 or 16 wins. And yes, they have the toughest schedule of these 3 teams we're talking about. However, I think this team is good enough. Surely the offense is good enough to be considered realistic candidates to be 15-2. And at that point, he's certainly in the discussion. A 1 seed in the NFC with that type of performance is going to be in the conversation. And actually, as I look at sort of the rest of their schedule, some really high profile games that could give him some push. Right, Monday Night Football standalone game, Week 17 at the Niners. Like that's the kind of game you win, and everybody writes their column the next day of that the clear coach of the year is Dan Campbell. Look at what the Lions just did. And so he is. I think it's a club of 3, and Campbell's on the outside of the 3 right now, just because his schedule is the toughest. And honestly, if you are a Dan Quinn supporter, which I think we both are, in terms of betting this market, we need the Buffalo Bills to win some games, Jay. We need Sean McDermott to knock out the Chiefs' undefeated run, and we need the Buffalo Bills to beat the Lions on December 15th. And if we can accrue some damage to these elite teams and the Chiefs and the Lions, then I think that keeps the door open for a 12-win Commanders team to sneak it home. So, Quinn also, like, by the way, just like he just deserves a lot of credit for putting this team together and playing as well as they are. Like this Commanders team was expected to be bottom 3 defense start the season, and they're clearly not. This is a really impressive job.
From your mouth to God's ears, Drew Dinsick. I will say, though, I was pretty ready to strangle Dan Quinn after he punted on 4th and inches against the Bears. But he knew he drew it up perfectly in the end, knew exactly what he was doing, and just needed a moment of madness from Tyreek Stevenson to get it all home. I mean, I don't think he really needs to sneak it in at 12-5. I think 12-5, he'll take on all comers at 12-5. I think he just has to dodge Andy Reid or Dan Campbell doing something insane at that point. But just quickly before we move on to Donald Trump against Kamala Harris, the reasons why I don't think Harbaugh, Payton, to a lesser extent, to the same extent, Tomlin, and when everyone's listening to this, you'll know if Mike Tomlin has beaten the Giants. We don't know that yet. But the reason why I'm low on those guys is you have to actually draw up what is the scenario in which they win, because they actually win Coach of the Year. They can get to really nice seasons and be down ballot guys pretty easily, but how do they actually have the best case? And so Jim Harbaugh, I think his ceiling realistically, the division is all but gone. They're 3 games on the tiebreak back of the Chiefs. I've got them 26-1 to win the division. If they do that, then sure, then he can absolutely win Coach of the Year. But barring that, it's pretty, I got him plus 700 to get to 12 wins. And even then, a 12-5 wild card, I guess it has a chance, but I think there's just bound to be a case that beats Jim Harbaugh being a 12-5 wild card with Justin Herbert from winning Coach of the Year. And then with Sean Payton, I think it would be a lot easier for Payton if the strength of the team was the offense and Bo Nix was a leading offensive Rookie of the Year candidate. But Bo Nix has been very meh, and the defense has been the story of that team, which has, not nearly as much to do with Payton. And again, so what is his actual case to winning? Is he really going to win us an 11-6 wild card with a quarterback who has kind of barely met expectations, if at all? I just don't think these cases are going to win. If they reach their 95th percentile outcomes, then yeah, absolutely. But they're not 19-1, they're 6-1. So I don't think there's any meat on the bone whatsoever with these guys.
I think that's very well said.
Yep. Okay, perfect. All right, before we get to the election, the world's fastest thoroughbreds come together this weekend in Del Mar to compete for the title of world champion at the Breeders' Cup. Catch the action from Southern California on Saturday at 3:30 p.m. Eastern on NBC and Peacock. As you all know by now, we've teamed up with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all our picks, and we'll have special offers for our listeners each week. If you haven't signed up to BetMGM yet, use bonus code BETEDGE, and you'll get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using bonus code BETEDGE. Deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you'll receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your first bet loses. Just make sure you use bonus code BETEDGE when you sign up. See BetMGM.com for terms. 21 plus only. U.S. promotional offers not available in New York, Nevada, Ontario, or Puerto Rico. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Available in the U.S. Call 8778-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467369 in New York. Call 1-800-NEXT-STEP in Arizona, 1-800-327-5050 in Massachusetts, 1-800-BETS-OFF in Iowa, 1-800-981-0023 in Puerto Rico. First bet offer for new customers only, subject to eligibility requirements. Rewards are non-withdrawable bonus bets that expire in 7 days in partnership with Kansas Crossing Casino and Hotel. Don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code BETEDGE and get your $1,500 first bet offer today. Okay, presidential election right now in the market. Donald Trump is minus 190 offshore to become the president again. Kamala Harris is plus 165, which is, yeah, I mean, we really need to get into all of that. But in terms of talking about the market itself, I think where is most relevant to start is just sifting through and interrogating the idea of how solid this pricing is, and this just the market and the market dynamics around whether the pricing is vulnerable or not. And I think this is important to do with pretty much any market that you're ever betting into. And it's why I barely even look at like NFL lines an hour before kickoff, because I'm just not going to bet them, because there's too many market forces that indicate that those markets are extremely difficult to beat. With the election, I think that it is a very unique market where there is basically unlimited liquidity. Like there has been, I think, $2.6 billion traded on Polymarket on the outcome of the election. And as a general rule, liquidity usually correlates extremely heavily to pricing reliability. But I think there are lots of reasons to believe that for the election, that is not necessarily the case. And there have been other instances of this, like you basically bet unlimited on the Mayweather-McGregor fight, despite all indications being that Mayweather at minus 235 or whatever was just a completely violently insane price. And I think the election carries elements of that, where the previous election in 2020, basically every publicly available polling model had Joe Biden north of 90% to win the election, and in the market he was minus 150, which implies a 60% chance. And then when he lost Florida and North Carolina to start the night, he drifted out to I think like plus 500 in running, even though models at that point said that he should still be the slight favorite. And then also the other dynamic is that there are people who bet so much money into this market that it just skews the price, because if you put $30 million on Donald Trump, then the price just kind of has to move. And it's very difficult to get a gauge on whether that money is informed or not. So before we get into some other stuff that I want to talk about, like these publicly available models, like the polling methodology, and if there is any bet to be made, in my opinion, do you have any kind of macro thoughts about political betting, the election market in particular?
I mean, I kind of like the way that you set the table there. The idea that this is money that's well informed, shaping the current pricing, I find to be unlikely. There are a lot of people who have a lot of money who are making bets on this election, that I think are either kind of looking at a very tilted worldview because of the media they consume, and they are seeing, they're literally consuming what they want to hear about the outcome of this race. When I think the reality is it is exceptionally close. 2 cycles in a row, this has come down to 100,000 plus or minus across a couple of states, and that is not going to change this time. I think the reality is, if you can do a good job of forecasting the turnout and just in general the breakdown of people that turn out in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, I can't see either of those states being more than 55% chance either way, based on the numbers that exist now. And the best polls that are out there are really just they're sampling 800 registered voters. Like, that is a very, very small look at, very narrow scope, to try to then extrapolate to what is happening in a state. And it is, in my opinion, at least, much, much closer to a coin flip than any of the prices that are out there. And I am somewhat hesitant to bet into Harris now at this plus money price because of exactly the way you tailored the night of with Joe Biden. I don't know that I don't see a very strong likelihood that Harris surprises to the good in North Carolina or Florida. The margin of there, I know, is still within the error, but it would be somewhat of a shock. And the fact that those 2 states could go Trump early, I would expect would set up the exact same scenario where you can get Harris in the 5 to 10 to 1 range, which is where I think, that is maybe money more well spent. So that also could be part of the equation here, where people are trying to arbitrage. They're trying to, find ways into prices that are going to make them the most money betting both sides of this. And if that's what's fueling most of the Trump enthusiasm right now, as far as there being both dumb and smart money betting into that side of the equation, then that would actually make the most sense to me. I think for me, at least strategically, this is wait until night of, and try to find best price on Harris, because I think this is going to come down to very, very narrow margin in 2 states.
Yeah. So you mentioned the polling at the start there, and I think that's really important to understand. One, how these markets are priced, what people use to make their decisions to bet on markets or not. And so, like, I think driving a lot of the markets or a lot of bets on the market in the past two or beyond that election cycles have been people like Nate Silver and their publicly available models, which are based naturally off of polling. And so I think with any publicly available model, it's really important to kind of interrogate, like, okay, so why would this be smarter than the market, or why would it be setting the market? And so with someone like Silver, one, he seems to be highly intelligent, and then two, just as importantly, he seems to be extremely incentivized to be correct on what he is doing, because it is his livelihood. And so, as opposed to some like random website that is publicly publishing like its simulations for like MLB divisions and has the Yankees 70% when the market says they're 20% or whatever, like, you just have to be skeptical of like what are the incentive factors driving this to efficiency. With someone like Silver, you can be pretty confident in that. And I think that he probably has as good a gauge as anyone that is publicly available on how best to collate polling and create projections off of that. But the thing now with polling, and anyone who's betting on the election should be, diving into this, is that there are so many thumbs on the scale now with polling and with weighting different aspects of polling. Like, I recommend everyone read Nate Cohn in the New York Times wrote an article on recalled vote and weighting recalled vote, which is basically when you're polling someone, you ask them who they voted for in the last election, and then you weight off of what their response is. So say you poll 100 people, and 85 of those people say they voted for Joe Biden in 2020, then you need to weight and regress against that, because 85% of people didn't vote for Joe Biden, so you regress it back. And there's just a lot suspect in that, in the one, people forget who they voted for. People arbitrarily skew and are biased towards saying that they voted for the person who won the last election because they misremember, and that's kind of been borne out. So, and it's not that the pollsters are like, there's nothing nefarious about this necessarily. It's just that they need to make subjective adjustments to weight their sample, because you're never going to get a perfect sample. So you're weighting based on demographics and likely voters and registered voters and all these different aspects, and it just creates more subjectivity on top of subjectivity. And so the way I'd think about this is that, like, if you're betting purely off of Nate Silver's model, which I think is an excellent baseline and was correct in driving a lot of bets the previous election, because there was just such a massive delta between what his price was and what the market's price was. But this time around, what I would say is that, like, basically pollsters are making bets themselves on the polling data. And then someone like Silver or other people making projection models, they are making bets on how to weight the quality of each pollster. So if you're betting based off of that, you are basically placing bets on someone's bets on someone else's bets on the polling data. And it's just like all these different layers, which are just creating all this subjectivity, which I think makes it extremely difficult to kind of ascertain truth and fair pricing. And so now what is most interesting to me, and what will drive decisions whether to bet or not, is whether this polling methodology and the changes that have happened in the past 4 years in particular, because like last election cycle was really wonky in terms of polling because it was during a pandemic. And yes, the polls, they oversold. They oversold the Democrats, but also, like, Democrats were just more likely to socially distance. They were more likely to be at home and available for polling, and Democrats just in general are more likely to participate in polling. And so I think there is something that has happened, and this is like just my best read, is that in the kind of polling world, that pollsters are kind of a little bit terrified of underselling Donald Trump for a third consecutive election. That there have been measures to try and prevent against that, as opposed to just taking the data on face value, which Nate Cohn argues for in his New York Times article. So my best sense is that the polling is more likely to undersell Harris than to undersell Trump in this election. Do you have any thoughts on that, or anything that I just said?
No, I have noticed that specifically. like trying to dig in a little bit as to how the polls are being aggregated. And I would also add to that 2022 was the first miss the other way, where they underappreciated what the turnout was going to be like because there was so much motivation in that particular cycle. And this could be very similar. And so, yeah, we could be in we could have had a paradigm shift. If you said the polls are going to miss one way, which way are they going to miss this year? My gut would say Harris also. But I am not so sure of that. I have my entire bankroll into this what looks like too good to be true price. So yeah, I guess the one kind of other thing that I've been trying to personally figure out and dig through and try to digest here is in 2020, a state like Pennsylvania had 3 million mail-in ballots requested, and they got 85% of those returned with votes. And this cycle, only 1.7 million were requested. And so I don't know if that's like, and the pandemic obviously has something to do with this, like the awareness of how much people were beating into the, hey, get your mail-in ballot, requested by this cutoff date. Don't forget. This time that didn't happen. And so people maybe just, oh, fine, whatever, I'll just go vote on voting day. Like, I don't know what that is going to do to turnout. And I think that could ultimately just in general hurt Democrats. And so that's kind of where, when I'm doom scrolling or looking for like the red team case here, it all kind of comes back to like, is there potentially, was 2020 a paradigm shift in terms of just the access, a number of people voting, or was that a one-off because of the pandemic, and now we're going to kind of go back to a more normal world where people are just too busy on election day to get out there and vote, if they have jobs and if they have, if they're, kids, things get in the way. And so, I can't, these next 8 days are going to feel like 8 years. I think, again, like my strategy is pretty much going into this with looking for an opportunity to bet Harris at the bottom of the market. And that's going to be when they announce who wins Florida.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, based off of the, I think, pretty irrational market movements last election when Florida and North Carolina, I think, were the first two kind of major states called, and they both went for Trump, and Biden drifted out significantly, even though he didn't really need those states ever as part of his path. And also there was a lot of kind of positive polling at the county level in terms of demographics that were going to carry over to the Midwest and the states that he needed. And so I think looking for that kind of stuff on election night, so long as you're not overcome by the sense that the world might be ending, and can kind of lucidly think through what is happening and place bets, then that is perhaps the best way to attack it. Last thing I'll say is that there's different ways to bet the election. You don't need to just bet on who's going to win. There are other ways in, like betting on the popular vote winner, betting state by state markets. Like right now, you can bet on Harris at about, plus 150 to win Pennsylvania and plus 165 to win the election. So you're doing the trade-off of like, all right, well, there's about a 90% correlation between Harris winning Pennsylvania and winning the election. So are you better off just backing at the state-by-state level? Like her path has always been to win Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania and get that blue wall home. And then she doesn't need to worry as much about Arizona and North Carolina. I think she's just going to lose Florida regardless. But I think my best, the bet that I would make at the moment would be on Polymarket. Harris is 60% to win the popular votes. That like Silver's model has Harris at over 72% to win the popular vote as we're recording right now. And so I think that delta combined with our assessment that she's more likely to be undersold perhaps by the polls would lead me to think that is perhaps the best bet at the moment. At least that would be the bet that I would be making. And then potentially there may be a better buy-in point on her to actually win the election because of the market forces we spoke about.
I completely agree. And the fact that Wisconsin and Pennsylvania are both Senate elections that are tilting blue right now also doesn't really jive with, I think, the pessimism of her holding the blue wall. And I think she will win. but it is going to be a miserable election night.
I echo everything you said there. All right, we are done for now. Don't forget to check out NBCSports.com for more information to help you with your wagers. Thanks to those watching on the NBC Sports YouTube channel. If you're listening to us in podcast form, don't forget to rate and subscribe. Also, a reminder to find all your favorite NBC Sports shows on Amazon Music. Just head to amazon.com/NBC Sports. From a worried myself and a worried Drew Dinsick, we'll see you soon.